Thank you, Donald. And I'm here in Washington, D.C. on a day of chaos and travel disaster across the USA. We'll talk about that later on in the show. Meanwhile, it's Labour's position on Brexit. It's Labour's stance as an opposition party that is increasingly, and quite rightly, coming under scrutiny. Yesterday, there was frankly mass confusion as Diane Abbott made it clear that Labour would not support a second referendum, and yet Deputy Leader Tom Watson refused to rule out a second referendum and was supported by other Labour front benchers. We had Tony Blair yesterday. He never gives up, does he? Blair saying that actually stopping Brexit should be Labour's priority ahead of winning the next election. And I see a direction of travel, and perhaps Alison McGovern, the Labour MP for Wirral South, and she's a founder of the Labour campaign for the single market, she kind of sums up to me where Labour are going on this. She says, we have seen more support for Labour as the Tories have fallen under the spell of Nigel Farage and the hard Brexiteers. So she's making the case that we should stay part of the single market in many ways. She's rerunning the referendum. And today, well, Barry Shearman, one of Labour's Brexit spokesmen, Member of Parliament for Huddersfield, has said that whilst the Prime Minister has been toiling away in Brussels to push Brexit talks forward, he's been quite nice in a way about the Prime Minister, he said she'd returned to see the Foreign Secretary, Mr Boris Johnson, suggesting the UK risks becoming a vassal state if it cannot strike a deal that allows it to ditch EU laws. Shearman said, will she give us a crystal clear answer for my constituents and people up and down the country? Is she leading us into a vassal state, a subservient role in Europe? If that's not the case, will she sack her Foreign Secretary? And Mrs May replied, no. So I think if you look at the direction of travel, the change in Labour's stance on the single market, the customs union, since that general election back in June, is there enough evidence now to say that Labour is a Remain party? And if you think I'm right on that, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think I'm being unfair and all that Labour want is the best deal for Britain, in which case text to 84850, or perhaps you're completely confused as to where Labour stands, in which case you can comment on Twitter using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course you can watch me on Facebook from here in DC and comment there too. Is Labour now becoming a Remain party? I think they really are. I wonder what James in Manchester thinks. Good evening.
Good evening, Sir Nigel. Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think that Labour have behaved absolutely treacherously in the entire process of Brexit. I've never been a Labour supporter, but I am aware there are over 4 million of their supporters that voted for Brexit. They need to remind themselves, give themselves a constant reminder, particularly Diane Abbott, that when they, in their manifesto, that they signed up to the Brexit and everything that was in the Brexit proposed negotiations, they seem to have gone back completely on every single word. And every day, one of the top three in their cabinet has a completely contradictory view to the other. How anybody could trust them, and how they have the audacity to condemn any negotiations that are going on at the moment, which are not brilliant, I know, but to even suggest that they would be in a more fitting position is quite frankly ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is confusion, James, because what they've been trying to do is to keep both of their wings of supporters together, namely the young Corbynista students, many of whom seem to think the European Union is a great thing, and a lot of the old Labour voters in the Midlands and the North and South Wales and places like that. So kind of the confusion, in one way, is allowing both those voices to be out there. But I do think, that said... Yeah. But there is a direction of travel, isn't there? And the direction of travel, and and you said treacherous, and it's a strong word, but I mean, Corbyn, during that manifesto launch, couldn't have been clearer. Leaving the single market, stopping free movement, leaving the union. He was very clear on all of those things. Now, it is possible, James, that they've changed their mind in the course of the last 5 months, but I think what we're really... But what's really happening here, James, in my view, is that the party, Corbyn himself has been a sceptic for decades, but I think it's the parliamentary Labour Party is so Blairite, and I think they're now in control of the agenda.
I think that's exactly, you've hit the nail on the head, and you're absolutely right. Corbyn, have you noticed we haven't heard anything from him directly? Well, what he's trying to do is what we call the old sitting on the fence. He wants to see which way the wind is blowing, which is precisely how Labour operate. They'll want to see which way the wind is blowing, whether there's a stronger vote for the youth of the UK, or whether it'll be the elderly. They're just lying in waiting just to see what is going to go with the flow, and that's how they operate. You had Diane Abbott, on the TV the other day saying that she wants free movement to continue even after we have left the European Union. I mean, these are people that are not, Nigel, in touch whatsoever. And all these people, they really do make me sick. They keep saying the preamble is always on these question time, whatever it is. Oh, well, we do support the referendum, and the but then takes us on a whole rainbow of excuses as to why they want to overturn it. And you know what, Nigel? For me, in particular, I campaigned for 3 months to get us out of the EU, and I won't let it be wasted. And at the end of the day, these people are supposed to believe in democracy. They don't believe in democracy. They want
afraid I rather think you're right, James, I have to say. And I thank you for your comments and your calls. And James from Manchester thinks the Labour Party, frankly, have been treacherous in their approach. And as we speak, just down the road of the White House, President Trump is making a speech here, and he's talking about national security and global security and America's role within it. More on that as that story develops. I wonder what another James in Clapham, thinks of my proposition that Labour is now becoming a Remain party. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you, Nigel. Nigel, myself, I'm a socialist. I voted Labour. I was conned into voting to Labour, into the Battersea constituency. And let me tell you this now. The only reason I voted Labour is because they said they would agree to the Brexit terms, which I voted for.
Yes.
And now they are turning their backs on it. I watched Diane Abbott cut her own throat on Sunday on the Andrew Marr show. I watched the Daily Politics with Mr. Kinnock this morning. I am sick to the back teeth of them telling me what I should be voting for. And when I voted to leave, Nigel, like yourself, when I voted to leave, I didn't flip the ballot paper over and say, voted to leave, go to section 2.1. Did I vote to leave the ECJ? Did I vote to leave I voted to leave everything. And I'm going to be burning my card today. So the Battersea MP, Mr. Sousa, let me tell you this now. You and the rest of those treacherous demons, I am no longer voting Labour. I will not vote. And if it means voting Tory, I will vote Tory. I voted out. I want out. I'm sick and tired of you telling me that I did not know what I'm voting for.
Wow. Strong stuff, James. So if there are many like you out there, then there will be an electoral price that Corbyn pays for changing this policy, won't there?
Yes, it will. Nigel, I'm in the People's Republic of London at this moment in time. And, you can laugh. It's the Labour cabal. Now, I will be voting Conservative if I have to. If it's UKIP, I will vote UKIP. Whoever that can push that woman out in Battersea, I will vote for, because I have had enough of this, Nigel. I voted out, and don't try.
So James, for you, Brexit is bigger than party loyalties. It's bigger than left-right politics. This to you is the issue of our time, yeah?
Well, Nigel, if I could just go and say Game of Thrones, right? When they're fighting the White Walkers, it's not a matter of honour anymore. It's a matter of life or death. We need to come out.
Right. James, very strong call. I thank you for it. Well, James there is going to burn his Labour membership card, so let down does he feel by the party. And as I say, 4 million, maybe nearer 5 million. People who voted for Corbyn last June in the general election had voted Brexit the previous year. It all depends how strong a Brexiteers they are, I guess. Charlotte is calling from the Forest of Dean. Good evening, Charlotte.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, are Labour now a Remainer party?
Well, I think Labour are now, they have flip-flopped around for a very long time, even during the Brexit debate, on whether they want to sit on one side or another. And they've never really been able to quite make a decision. Now, I think that when Corbyn started putting in the manifesto that they may honour some areas of the Brexit agreement and that they wanted Brexit, I think that's when the pro-Blairites moved in, and they have now completely tipped the party over onto the other side. And there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of resistance apart from the usual suspects like Kate Hoey and Frank Field, who
Charlotte,
genuinely want Brexit.
That was interesting because that division last week where the government got beaten, it was only Kate Hoey and Frank Field that supported the government on this. And I wondered then, what had happened to Badena Skinners? What had happened to these people who've been Eurosceptic for decades? Suddenly it seems that we're back to a kind of politics in both Labour and Tory where for most MPs, supporting the party matters more than political principle.
Well, yes, and I thoroughly agree with you on that, Nigel. And I feel that people like Hilary Benn and Keir Starmer, they have literally eroded through whatever means the party into now taking a strong Remain stance. But the thing is that parts of them still can't sing from the same hymn sheet. And if you look at the shafting, Nicky Morgan and also the Labour Party, Long Bailey, actually got absolutely shafted on question time last week. I mean, it was a bloodbath. The party supporters gave them what for?
Yeah, no, this was Barnsley, a Leave constituency, and they were not holding back with career politicians who were now supporting Brexit, despite what their manifestos had said. Yeah, no, Charlotte, I thought that was very, very instructive, as was your call. I thank you. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Washington, D.C., and it's 7:15. The Blairites have got the upper hand, in my view, and Labour is rapidly becoming a Remain party. And it was summed up today, really, by Barry Shearman, their Member of Parliament for Huddersfield, demanding that the Prime Minister sack the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson for daring to suggest that we could become a vassal state of the European Union if we get a deal that doesn't allow us to change EU rules. Add to that, Mr Blair saying the party should prioritise Brexit even over winning the next election, and MP after MP now coming out saying that they want Labour to be the next government to keep Britain in the single market and in the customs union, which not only goes against their manifesto in June, but goes against the result of the referendum. I wonder what Martin in Epsom makes of that. Good evening, Martin.
Good evening. I'm also angry with the Labour Party because they're not Remain enough. And I've always had a problem with Jeremy Corbyn, well, being a centrist for one thing, but for the second, him doing an appalling job during the referendum, and now clearly being on your side of the argument. From my point of view, if I were you, I'd be over the moon because there is no one apart from the Lib Dems opposing Brexit. There should be an opposition in this country. They owe us a moral duty to an opposition for someone to vote for. And at the moment, I can't vote for anyone except the Lib Dems, who, let's be honest, aren't going to win. So,
Martin, would you normally vote Labour?
I actually voted Labour in 2015.
Okay.
That was just to keep out Plaid Cymru because I was at uni in Wales.
Okay. I mean, Martin, I completely understand the idea that a party in politics can oppose Brexit and want to overturn it. And Vince Cable is perfectly, I had him on the show the other Sunday. He's perfectly clear that he thinks Brexit's a mistake and it needs to be reversed. And I understand that. The point I'm making, Martin, about Labour is their manifesto back in June was a Eurosceptic manifesto. That has changed and they've moved in your direction quite a lot, haven't they?
I agree their last manifesto was shocking. It wasn't any... But yeah, you see, the thing is, I don't personally think that the Labour Brexit policy differs too much from the Tory one. I mean, the Tory Brexit policy is, let's just say, intangible at best. And the Labour one, as the previous caller pointed out on the opposite side of the argument, does sort of jump from side to side. And the problem is that the Labour Party themselves don't know what they want. but they're led by a Eurosceptic who's secretly, in my opinion, happy that we're leaving. But I wouldn't worry too much about them betraying Brexit or any of that weird vocabulary that your side uses, because I think you're safe as houses, to be honest.
Well, if we stay in a single market, Martin, we haven't got Brexit.
Well, we can rehash the arguments of the referendum if you like. I mean,
no, I'm just saying that everybody on the Remain side said if we vote to leave, we'll leave the single market. That'll be a disaster. And everybody on the Leave side said if we leave, we're leaving the single market. I mean, the parameters were pretty clear on this.
Now, look, everyone who voted Remain most people who voted Remain would either not have Brexit or have a soft Brexit. And I personally would prefer a soft Brexit. Yes, you're absolutely right.
So you must be very pleased with the Prime Minister then, because while she talks tough at the dispatch box, as she did again today, actually she's leading us towards the softest of all Brexits, isn't she?
To some degree. I also think she's still sort of being bullied by Gove and Boris, who, even if I were a Brexiteer, I wouldn't like particularly, because they both just not seem to have a single honest bone in their body. But I don't think, and Rees-Mogg as well, I think there are still quite a few, what's the term, Brextremists in her party that are quite happy steering the ship.
How is it extreme to want to honour the referendum result, Martin?
You can leave the European Union and not the single market and honour the referendum. It was a binary
I'm sorry, Martin. I'm sorry, Martin. Martin, everybody on both sides made it clear that if we voted to leave, we were leaving the single market.
Nonsense. Half the Leave campaign said one thing. You yourself were separate from. You point out continuously that you were separate from the bus and that figure, which was a separate campaign to what you were doing. So you have to admit that there were at least two different sides campaigning for Brexit, some of which saying we could be like Norway, many of them saying we could be like Norway.
Let me assure you that Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and the Vote Leave camp, whilst, yes, I did disagree with them strongly about the number on that bus, I did then and I still do, but that's by the by. On the single market, we all spoke with one voice, as indeed did David Cameron and Nick Clegg and everybody. And it seems to me, Martin, that what your side of the argument are trying to do is to reinterpret that referendum result.
Nigel, the way I interpret the referendum result is by looking at the question which was asked, which is, do you want to leave, yes or no? Well, not exactly like that, but it was binary, right? 1 or 2.
Yep.
And the problem with that is, did some people voted because they wanted less foreigners in this country? Some people voted because they believed that the lie that the EU made 70% of our laws or some nonsense like that.
More than that in many cases, but you know.
Right, but you and I can agree that different Brexit voters voted Brexit for different reasons.
Yeah, no, in terms of priorities, yes. But what I'm saying, Martin, and I'm really going to strongly stick by this, is that if you're in the single market, effectively you're in the European Union because you accept the jurisdiction of a foreign court, you accept the fact that your laws are made somewhere else, and you probably would even struggle to get the ability to make your own trade deals.
Nigel, if we got a Norway model, would you as an MEP lose your job?
Hopefully, yes. And you could argue...
The EU, wouldn't we? Then we would have left the EU. If you, as a British MEP, lose your job after Brexit and we get a Norway model, then we will have had Brexit. It will have... In a sense,
what we'll have...
hard Remain. They don't call it
what we'll have. What we'll have is a worse form... We'll have a worse form of membership, won't we? A worse form of membership than we've currently got. We'll have no say. I mean, not that we've ever had much say anyway, but we'll have no say whatsoever. We'd have to accept open borders and free movement of peoples, a foreign court, and our laws being made somewhere else. That, Martin, in my view, is what we voted against. But listen, it's a very good debate. OK. Nigel, I've also put my Labour Party membership card in the bin. They called me today asking me to stay, and when I said it was because they were going against Brexit, the guy agreed with me and said a lot of people are saying that to him, not just me then. Interesting. Wonder what Dara in Harrow makes of this. Good evening, Dara.
Evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm watching the Tory government delay, and soften Brexit hugely. And I'm watching the Labour Party going even further, Dara, in my opinion, in what I think is the wrong direction.
I mean, I myself am a Labour member, and I think I've spoken to you in the past, and I'm also someone who, like lots of other socialists, like lots of other Labour people, like over 70% of Labour constituencies, wants to leave the European Union. And I have to tell you, I'm both embarrassed and disillusioned by the way in which the Parliamentary Labour Party has behaved on this issue. To try and suggest that you can stay in the single market and the customs union and achieve Brexit is nonsense, Nigel. And, I listened to the last caller trying to justify it technically.
I know.
I think the question that you've got to ask yourself is this. If you stay in the single market and the customs union, what exactly changes? And I'll tell you what changes. Absolutely nothing. You're still under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice to a large degree. You still have to accept the free movement of people. And you're still in a situation where you could be spending massive amounts of money paying into the EU budget. You're essentially still in the EU in everything other than name. And the fact of the matter is that the British people, we voted to leave. There's no doubting that. We voted to go. It was a two-sided question. You either remain in the EU and you remain in the single market, or you leave the European Union and you leave all of its associated institutions. And if you want to leave the European Union, you have to get out of the single market and you have to get out of the customs union. It's simple as that. If I said to you, Nigel, I'm going to leave my house today, but at the same time I'm going to stay in the dining room and I'm going to stay in the kitchen, it just wouldn't work. It's not possible. And that's exactly the same with the single market. And
you wouldn't really have left, Dara, would you? That's the point. I mean, given and look, you understand this completely. Can you, given what you just said to me, Dara, can you go on supporting a Labour Party that is turning against everything it said in its manifesto just 5 months ago?
I mean, my principles are Labour. And I disagree with them on this issue, but my core principles on issues like economics and most social policy is Labour. But I'll make this point as well, Nigel, I think you'd probably be interested in it, because even though the manifesto rightfully said that we should leave the single market, unfortunately, it wasn't properly enforced. And here in Harrow, when we were out canvassing in the election, we had a good candidate, and I was very happy with what he was saying. But the one issue I did not agree with on his leaflet, and I said it to him, was point 3, which says, I will fight for full membership of the single market. And really, if your party is saying we're going to leave, that institution, we're going to end free movement, and you've got MPs and candidates across the country openly defying that, you have a big problem. And I think it's, and I will criticise Corbyn here, and I will criticise the Parliamentary Labour Party for not enforcing the party line more clearly.
Well, but Dara, weren't they appealing in Harrow, where you live, which was an area that voted to remain? Weren't they appealing to Remain voters in the south and Leave voters in the north? Weren't they playing a bit of a trick and getting both sides to support them?
You know what? As much as I hate to say it, I have to agree with you, and I have to say that as a party member, I am both embarrassed and disgusted by the direction which the party is taking on. So, Nigel, if and there's always been discussion in the Labour Party about why we're losing working class voters to UKIP, and fair enough, UKIP, is more or less a Thatcherite party. You wouldn't think it would appeal to many working class voters, but when you ignore what people have been saying, working class fishermen, working class farmers, people who've lost their jobs in these industries for several years. What do you expect? You can't ask people to keep supporting you if you're not going to listen to them. And
No. And Dara, actually, UKIP in 2015 particularly did amazingly well, picked up a lot of Labour voters, and those voters didn't see UKIP as Thatcherite. They just saw it as a patriotic party saying many of the same things they were. Dara, great phone call, fascinating. I really think we're onto something here. I think Labour have exposed a very big flank. I think that the fact they've moved now so much in favour of the single market and the customs union could cost them very dearly indeed. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Washington, D.C. It's 7:30. In a moment, we'll return to the subject of are Labour now becoming a Remain party, and the callers I'm getting tonight, Labour Brexit voters, are pretty angry with the party. One even said he was going to burn his membership card. But before we do that, I'm here in Washington, D.C. There's a lot happening in the USA today, and not all of it good. Joining me is LBC's US correspondent, Simon Mark. Simon, welcome to the show. Now, out in Washington State, there's been a train disaster. Please
Absolutely.
explain.
Yeah, and we should explain this is on the west coast of the United States in Washington State, not here in Washington, D.C., on the east coast of the country where we are. But train 501, which is an Amtrak train, was this morning making its inaugural journey along a new route out of Seattle down towards Olympia in Washington. It has traditionally gone along a scenic waterway, but as of this morning, it started routing itself along a highway, motorway Interstate 5 in Washington State, and a tragic derailment occurred. The death toll now stands at 6 people dead. We don't have a firm number on the number of casualties, people injured that have been taken to hospital, but the authorities say they expect the death toll to rise. And if you've seen any of the imagery from the scene, aerial images particularly, show that as many as 5 railway carriages derailed, one of them dangling completely over a bridge above the motorway. And remarkably, no motorists on that very busy motorway appear to have died in this accident, which is now being investigated by America's National Transportation Safety Board. There is one report, a very early and unconfirmed report, that says the train may have hit something as it approached that bridge over the motorway. But again, I think investigators are going to want to focus on the fact that this was a new route that the train was on. Day one of this new route for the first time. And one wonders whether everything had been checked out that should have been checked out before the train set off.
And just explain to listeners, Amtrak run the railway service in the United States of America, and we always think of America as being the great capitalist free market. Not quite the case here.
No, it's very interesting. I was saying on Ian Dale show a bit earlier on, I mean, for those of us who remember the days of British Rail in the UK,
awful.
Amtrak is the British Rail of the UK. It is government funded and it runs the National Railway service. And what makes Amtrak's job complicated is the fact that while it owns the stations and it owns the trains, it doesn't always own the tracks. It has to borrow tracks in some parts of the country from the big freight companies here, which do own and operate the tracks. Don't know whether that was the case on this particular section of track in Seattle or not. But, you know, the fact is that Amtrak is a state-operated, state-funded, state-managed enterprise. Its safety record has been somewhat spotty in recent years. And, of course, in vast swathes of the middle of the country, there's no real railway service to speak of in any great degree. But here on the east coast of the United States, as you know, Nigel, going from here to New York on a regular basis, and over on the west coast, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and routes further north than that, it's an absolutely vital part of America's commuter and transportation landscape.
And sticking with the transport theme, Atlanta Airport, I think it's the biggest hub airport in the whole of the USA. It's massive, it's vast, international flights, domestic flights, and an extraordinary power outage.
Absolutely amazing. A fire at an electricity substation yesterday is being blamed for cutting power to virtually the entire airport in Atlanta. And as anybody who flies in and out of the United States knows, you know, it only takes one electricity cut or a bad snowstorm at one airport like Atlanta or Chicago to bring the rest of the system to a standstill. At Atlanta yesterday, passengers in some cases were sitting on the tarmac for up to 6 hours waiting simply to get off aeroplanes that had landed at the airport while the power to the airport was cut. President Trump, within the last few minutes and earlier in the day on Twitter, cited what had occurred at Atlanta Airport as being part and parcel of the need for America to get its infrastructure act together, and he's proposing massive increases in infrastructural spending, and he's also been on his feet just within the last few minutes saying exactly the same about this railway accident out in Seattle, even though although we don't yet know what the cause of that railway accident was, he is citing it as an example of America's crumbling infrastructure and the need to do something
about it. I have a feeling the President may have got this wrong in the case of the train accident, because it was brand new track. So it's not about lack of money, it's about something that's gone wrong. But to think that in 21st century America, its biggest airport could be out through a power outage.
And it's extraordinary. I mean, I've been travelling in Asia recently, and, you know, the contrast between flying in to an American airport from an Asian airport is truly astonishing. And whatever your politics, I mean, there is a crumbling public transportation and particularly aviation infrastructure here that, for those of us who have been here, in my case, for nearly 25 years, you know, we've seen it crumble before our eyes, and at some point it's going to have to be addressed.
And infrastructure apart, Trump is on his feet as we speak, putting forward a new national security strategy.
Yes, he's got a doctrine, Nigel, the Trump doctrine, I think they hope this is going to be known as. He's laid out 4 pillars. This has all been going on in the last half an hour while Nigel's been on the air. 4 pillars of his national security strategy. First of all, he says, homeland security. It's all about building that wall along America's border with Mexico and cracking down on chain migration and implementing the revised version of his travel ban. Secondly, economic prosperity. He's claimed that for the first time, economic prosperity is now enshrined within his national security strategy as a key part of national security policy. It's not actually true. It's been enshrined in national security strategy since 1987, but he's prioritising it. The third pillar, peace through strength, in other words, building up America's military, maintaining its nuclear deterrence. And the fourth strategy, advancing America's influence internationally, which he said would be accomplished in part by building up American wealth and power at home. So he's still on his feet at the moment, as far as I know.
Just come off stage.
Just come off stage. There you go. But but that is Donald Trump's national security strategy.
A very Trump speech.
A very Trump, America first, but not necessarily America alone speech. He spent the first 10 minutes really trashing, I think it's fair to say, the record of his predecessors in power, accusing them of having surrendered American sovereignty. And he says that he's sending a message to the world that all of that ends now and America is going to stand up for itself, as he put it, in a way that it has never stood up for itself before.
Simon Marks, thank you for joining us and that briefing on everything happening, good and bad, in America today. Back to the Labour Party. Are they letting down their voters? I'm going to ask Danny in Epsom to answer that question for me. Good evening, Danny.
Of course they are, because they're actually two parties, aren't they, really? And their only policy is to keep as quiet as they can, so we can't figure that out. I mean, I look at Her Majesty's opposition, and I look at McDonald, and I look at Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn, and I think, they're such a rabble. Political misfits they are. Absolutely political misfits. I mean, anyone with a good political IQ could never vote for that party. But
Daddy, you say that, but they're on 42% in the opinion polls at the moment.
Oh, I just think because young people can't remember how bad the last Labour Party were. I mean, what worries me is Diane Abbott's talking yesterday, and one of the top 2 topics at the doorstep over the past 6 elections has been immigration, and everybody's ignored it apart from UKIP and yourself, Nigel. And you had to force the Tories into sort of looking at it. But you know, I've seen a lot of the towns and cities that I grew up in have completely changed. I mean, you know, it absolutely changed. And I think it's one of the biggest topics for me is that I want it to stop. I want the sort of social engineering, particularly under the last Labour Party. I mean, Wallace, Brown and Blair sold us down the river.
And Danny, they don't even want to address that issue, do they? They don't even want to talk about immigration, Labour. And despite the fact in their manifesto they reassured Brexit voters they would take back control of our borders. So, Danny, the Labour Party get very few points from you, yeah?
Oh, absolutely none whatsoever. And I'm actually quite frightened because I've got children. I look at our future and I think, what would happen if they got in? It frightens me because I think, you know, young people don't remember how bad New Labour were.
Wow.
You know, how bad they were with the economy, and they couldn't control the borders. They didn't put any caps on new EU member states. I mean, they were awful, and I think young people can't remember it. So they built less homes per capita than any other government before or after.
One thing for certain, Danny, they've got a lot of support. Corbyn has got a lot of support, almost cult support from many of our student population out there. Danny, I thank you very much indeed. May should call an election. Labour would lose millions of votes. They're getting too cocky, says Bill in Gateshead. And on Twitter, anonymously I get, like the chap on your show, Nigel, I am also not voting Labour again, and I voted for them since the days of Neil Kinnock. I sense that Labour, becoming pro the single market and pro the customs union, are now vulnerable to losing a lot of votes on this issue. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusive at LBC, live from Washington, D.C. It's 7:45. A lot of you angry with Labour because they really have changed their policy since the general election. But having said that, there's one or two not too happy with Mrs May either. John from Brentwood says, Boris is right. May is shamefully turning us into a vassal state. How can we stop her? She seems only to listen to Remainers. Well, John, whilst I'm being very critical tonight of the Labour Party, I'm not very happy at all with the concept that when the Prime Minister tells us we're leaving the European Union on March the 29th, 2019, but now we're going into at least two-year period of transition in which none of the rules, nothing at all will change. So the truth is, we're leaving the European Union in 2019 in name only. So I think the Tory party has got some problems on this too. I'm going to go to Phil in Crawley. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you.
Pleasure to speak to you. So my contention is that Labour are shifting and shifting. Yeah, sure, there's some confusion, but they're becoming effectively a Remain party.
I totally agree. I mean, what I would like to say first of all is it really does annoy me how Remainers have a very selective memory about the referendum. As you said earlier, it was absolutely clear by all concerned that we would be leaving the single market. That was obvious. Yep. And then David Cameron threatening the morning after the referendum, if we vote out, here, trigger Article 50 and off we go. And the people, despite all those threats, thought, we'll have some of that, and voted out. So it really annoys me, the selective memory. As for Labour, yes, I have completely... I think what happened, I don't know the stats, but I think what happened at the last election, I think a lot of UKIP voters thought, job done, and then they had a choice of going back to Tories or going back to Labour. I don't know what that split was. Maybe 50-50, I don't know.
Well, I think, Phil, that what happened was a lot of the commentators assumed that, and you're right, a lot of UKIP voters did think, look, do you know what? We voted UKIP in the European elections. We voted UKIP in the general election of 15. We're pleased we did it. We're pleased we forced a referendum. We're pleased we won the referendum. It is, as you say, many of them thought, job done.
Exactly.
What surprised people was a lot of the commentators thought they'd all vote for Mrs May because she's saying Brexit means Brexit. They'd all vote for Mrs May, and actually a big chunk, maybe half of the UKIP vote, voted Labour because Corbyn was so clear in his manifesto that Labour was about leaving the single market and taking back border controls.
That's exactly what happened, and I think there'd be a lot of disgruntled ex-UKIP Labour voters at the last election thinking we were duped. Now, I think, personally, there's a lot of scare stories about nobody wants an election, the Tories are scared stiff of an election, blah, blah, blah. I believe if they have a new leader, and their big, colossal mistake, this is another thing that really annoys me about the election, that people, Remainers since, have been harping on about, it was clear the electorate didn't want a hard Brexit, that's why the Tories didn't get a majority. No, what actually happened was they were still 18 to 20 points in front until that stupid manifesto. And that is what summed them up. Now, I think if they got a new leader, introduced a proper manifesto, we now know where Labour are edging back towards. And also, even if Labour did get in, they're harping from the sidelines saying, look at the mess the Tories are in. They'd have exactly the same problems in their own party if they were in power. They've got the same splits. But I think if they introduced a new leader with a proper manifesto, I think the Tories will get a majority. But what I would also say is, depending on who that leader was, I know a lot of people talk about Jacob Rees-Mogg. Perhaps
we do on this show, yeah.
Yeah, Dominic Raab. I think the problem with Jacob Rees-Mogg, nice chap, I think he's incredibly honest.
Well,
but I do think his personal opinions will be stripped bare by the left-wing media.
Well, you may be right. You may be right. But either way, Phil, either way, both parties, since that general election, have edged towards the single market, and a lot of us, Phil, you and me included, are not happy about it. So when Barry Shearman says that Boris should be sacked for saying that Britain could become a vassal state, I've been asked by quite a few people, what is a vassal state? And the English dictionary tells us that if one country is a vassal of another, it means it is controlled by it. So what Boris is saying is if we go into a transition period, and thereafter, if we were to have regulatory alignment that meant not just the existing rules, but new rules would apply to our economy without us being able to do anything about it, we would effectively be a vassal state. Jacob Rees-Mogg said we'd be a colony, and I said on Friday on Sky News that I felt if we go down this route, Mrs May is behaving like the leader of a nation that had been defeated in war, suing for peace. So that is what our side of the argument is saying. Nigel, Labour have launched the Titanic under Captain Corbyn with no lifeboats. That's the view that Jenny takes. John says, I'm completely confused about the whole lot. Who can be trusted? The majority voted leave. When I decide to leave a relationship, I don't need to negotiate a deal. I just leave, says John. I wonder what Will in Evesham makes. Good evening, Will. A regular caller to this show. I know you're a very keen Remain voter. Are you pleased with the way in which the Labour Party is going?
Well, I'm pleased because they're actually looking at the evidence, aren't they? I mean, I think we've had this discussion before. This isn't an evangelical thing. It's not a faith. It's not about believing I'm a Remainer or I'm a Brexiteer. It's actually looking at the evidence. Yeah. I mean, just looking at what you just said a few minutes ago about the vassal state comment. The reality is we have to accept the regulations because of Northern Ireland. Yes, so there's no border. All right, that's a reality. So we will inevitably then become. We will accept the regulations. The only difference will be we have no say. So the obvious thing to do is to cancel the madness. I think
So are you saying, Will? Are you saying, Will, that the whole of Brexit must be cancelled because of the border situation with Northern Ireland?
Absolutely. Because let's look at the facts. Yeah, we're going to pay up to 40 billion bill. We're going to have no influence in Europe. Okay, business is clearly saying this is damaging us, and what do we gain? And that's where the tumble-me moment comes in.
So the Labour Party Will, do you agree with me that Labour are becoming a Remain party?
Slowly. I think they'd have got there already if it wasn't for Corbyn. I think it's the irony with the Labour Party is that the supporters are Remainers, but you've got the leadership who are Brexiteers. I think there's an irony there, and then you've got the reverse going on in the Conservative Party. I think Keir Starmer seems to be doing a great job, but I think he's stymied by Corbyn and McConnell, McDonnell, who don't seem to know where they're going.
Nigel,
it's not believing Europe.
Oh, I couldn't disagree more with that, Will. And when I hear about the border in Northern Ireland, I mean, look, already we have along that border a different currency on each side of it, different tax rates either side of it. But hey, Will, when we come to discuss the merits of a single market, please call in. I'm not doing that. What I am doing is saying there's been a big shift in the Labour Party position, and I think it could cost them a lot of votes at the next election. But you maybe think that public opinion will move in your direction, yeah?
And it already is, isn't it? I mean, the latest poll is showing there's a 10 points lead to remaining. I don't
think that was the most reputable piece of polling, but.
As Tony Blair said, and I know those who will have various views on Tony Blair, but there is no bigger issue than remaining in the EU at the moment.
Will, how does the rest of the world survive without being governed by these old men in Brussels? Tell me.
Hello.
Hello. We've lost him. He didn't want to answer that one. Never mind. No problem. Will, a passionate Remainer who comes on this show. He's been on a few times this year, and whilst we disagree on the point, he does think the Labour Party is becoming more of a Remain party, but maybe Corbyn's holding it back. I don't know. My last caller this evening on this subject is Peter in Islington. Hello, Peter.
Hi, it's great to hear your show. Hi, I used to be a soft Brexit supporter.
Yep.
And I don't have a UK passport yet. I'm 21 years living here. But next year I'm going to be doing my UK passport to actually vote for Remain and Labour, because I think it's great. I want to stay close to Europe, and I'm going to be making my vote to Remain, actually.
So, Peter, you're a voter saying that if Labour clearly become a Remain party, that makes you more likely to vote for them.
Yes, I will be arranging my UK passport next year just to actually vote in the next referendum. Yeah.
Okay. Well, not referendum, election. Let's hope there's not another referendum, Peter, although there could be another referendum. We never know.
Could be.
Yeah, Peter, I thank you for your call. Well, Peter making the point that actually, there are people out there. There are a lot of people out there who think we should remain, and maybe Vince Cable's Liberal Democrats are just not quite cutting the mustard when it comes to that vote. I think Labour are moving very quickly in the direction of becoming a Remain party. They will fight, in my view, the next general election on a ticket saying there should be a second referendum on whether we stay permanently inside the customs union and the single market. That, I think, is where we're going. Will it gain them votes? I don't know. I think it may well cost them votes, and tonight's callers have indicated that. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Coming up this evening at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.